Hello students, I am here again to carry forward your topic from yesterday's topic, that is making of the global economy, that is globalization and the Indian economy. We are discussing about the different aspects that enable globalization in the country. We have so far discussed about the meaning of globalization, that there is integration and interconnection of the economies between the countries. We have so far discussed about the ways and means by which multinational companies are playing a very important role in the process of globalization. We have also discussed that how the international organization, WTO, World Trade Organization, is an organization. Previously it was formed by most of the European countries, and then most of the countries became its member because globalization is a reality today. Yesterday where we left the topic was the factors enabling globalization. There are certain factors that have actually enabled globalization in India, and the first and the foremost factor is technology. Without technology, we cannot even think of globalization, because from the time immemorial, from a very long time, previous times, trade was there, countries used to exchange goods, and ships were there, but not so good as we have today. Yesterday I gave you some hints that when the traders used to carry goods, and particularly the perishable and the breakable products in their ships, there was a loss to them, because perishable products used to get perished. So it was a loss to the traders as well as loss to the consumers, because their demands were not fulfilled. When the European ships, for example, when they went to the other countries to bring this mutton and slaughtered animals for them, because this is the main food of the European countries, and when it got perished and people could not get as they wanted in their country, the demand of the people was more and the supply was very less. So you know what they said? They said that we have got bored of eating bread and potatoes. They got bored of, because this was not available. So ships were fitted with the ice pieces, big ice pieces, and then the things were carried on, and people could get food, and now they were ready for their governments to do anything, to go for the battle, because now they were well fed. So this was the tendency, this was the making of the global world. So today technology have become very improved, and it is excellent. So without technology we cannot think of globalization. You just think over IT, information technology. You just think the aeroplanes, the transportation and communication, the radars, etc. Technology, even the phones, mobile phones, telephone, all this transportation. A magazine making company in London, it felt that in London pages are very costly, printing is very costly, and in India printing of magazines can be done at very nominal rates. So a magazine making company of London places an order to the Indian magazine making company at Delhi, sends the order through internet on computer, then also sends the contents, because they wanted their own contents to be written. They sent their contents to the company and ordered them to prepare to produce the magazines. The company, the magazine making company, sitting at Delhi, receives the order without moving. Here in this example, nobody is moving. 1,000 miles away they are sitting, and you will see that how orders are completed and how the working is done. So sitting 1,000 miles away, the Delhi based company receives the order from the London based company to produce magazines, content, etc., cover page, etc. They all receive the designing on computer. Then the Delhi based magazine making company, they produce all the magazines in time, and then they send all these magazines by air. By air, it is also a technology. All the magazines are sent by air to London, and even the money, the amount of money that is to be paid by the London based magazine making company to the Delhi based magazine making company is done through e-banking. The money is transferred from the Bank of London to the bank at Delhi. This is what? This has stimulated globalization, stimulation to globalization. Without moving, countries are doing trade and they are receiving their money also, their amount also. So this is how technology is working. Computer, IT, good transportation and communication means. So all these have enabled globalization today. Enabled means we have been enabled, we have been comfortable with the technology, and this made us to adopt globalization from 1991 onwards. So this is the first factor. It's 5 marks question separately for you. Understand? The second factor that has enabled globalization is liberalization, or what we call privatization, liberalization of foreign goods and investments. Here you must recall that the aim of the WTO is unhindered movement of goods and services, unhindered, even people. Because when we were discussing about colonialism in history, we discussed that it was one-way process, that only things were sent from India, from the colonies to the European countries, and it was one way, drain of wealth. But today it is both the way. If the countries are exporting, they are importing, vice versa. If they are importing, they are exporting. Liberalization of foreign goods and investment. And according to WTO, there should be unhindered movement of goods and services, even people. Previously, even only goods and services were exchanged between the countries. Today, even people can be sent. Skilled labor, migrated labor. Skilled labor is sent to the other countries. Actually, other countries demand for skilled labor for producing certain goods. So even people can be sent. However, we know that in Europe there is a restriction because they are aware about their demographic problems. But you have seen that in India, so many migrated people, so many people, they come to our country and they invest over here. Correct? Here, I want to tell you one more term, because when day before we were discussing about Chinese toys in India, we had discussed about the trade barriers. So here it is a short topic of what do you mean by trade barrier, or what are trade barriers? 3-mark topic. So trade barrier, barrier means a restriction that can be put, that a government can put on the coming of goods and services or people in a country. So it can be in 2 ways. Trade barriers can be imposed in 2 ways. And remember, putting trade barrier is not the policy of WTO. It is not the policy of World Trade Organization. These trade barriers are put by the governments or by the countries so as to protect their domestic producers. For example, in the Chinese toys, you have read that when Chinese toys began to pour into India, Indian toy makers perished. So in this example, you can see, and you can write down in your answers, that what the government could do, either they could put an import duty on the toys. If import duty is imposed, then Chinese toys would not have been so cheaply sold in the country. And moreover, when the import duty is imposed, the Chinese toy makers, they would have thought of sending so many toys to India. Correct? So this is a type of trade barrier, that is imposition of tax. That is tax on import on any product, if the government want to protect the Indian toy makers. And the second one is the quota, Quota, a quota, a number, a fixed number of goods and services that a country can send to our country or any other country. All the governments can impose all these barriers. So these trade barriers, barrier again restriction, that can be imposed by a home country where the problem occurs. Like we discussed the Chinese toys in India, the Indian toy makers were worried and they perished. So either the government can put import duty, levy tax on it, so many toys will not enter in Indian market and there will be a restriction. Then obviously there will be opportunity for the Indian producers to sell their goods, and then otherwise a quota can be fixed, a fixed number can be there, that only this much number of goods and services can enter into the country. So these are rightly called trade barriers. This is a 3 marks topic in between. Now again switch over, again come to your topic, liberalization. Liberalization and privatization. Do you know, students, that when India became independent, problems were acute, because although we got independence on 15th August 1947, but India was not a bed of roses as we got independence and now we are relaxed. No, there were a horde of problems, because the colonial government, the British government, left India in a scattered position, in a shattered position. Economy was shattered, poverty was there, unemployment was there. Indian producers were not able to compete with the other products, and there was lots of problems in the country. Poverty and unemployment was before the government, and it was very very feeling of sorry to know that after independence, even we were dependent for our food supplies on the other countries. The government could not fulfill the food supplies. Even wheat and rice we used to import. In this situation, the government decided to restrict the private sector and to encourage only the public sectors, that is government enterprises. Because government felt that at this juncture, at this scenario, if privatization is adopted, then obviously foreign companies will come to India, and that will be more destruction, because India still needs some time and some help and some help from the government to come up to the level of the other countries. So early, and you know, every country did it in its initial stages of development, even developed countries. Even developed countries, what we call England, France, USA, etc., even they did it. In the earlier stages of development, first of all, they protected their own producers, their domestic producers. So it was the strategy of the government to protect their domestic producers, and later on we will think about the private sectors. Correct? So it was going on, and the target was, I told you, poverty and unemployment to be removed. 5-year plans began to be made from 1951 onwards. In the 5-year plans, in every 5-year plan, there was a target that we have to achieve all these agricultural product input, agricultural output, contribution to the GDP, national income, etc. It was a target. And when by 1991 government realized that now the time has come that we can compete with the foreign producers. Moreover, according to a census, by 1991 poverty rose, unemployment rose high, because population was rising. And when private sectors were not allowed means there were restrictions on the private sector, restriction of licensing, restriction on export and import, restriction of taxes, etc. So many restrictions were there, so they resisted to grow. Because I told you that if the government would have allowed the private sector to come up, it would be an opportunity for the multinational companies to enter in India. So in 1991, first of all, I told you that the government realized that the time had come that now our producers were at par. At par means now they were able to compete with the foreign goods. Is it clear? And the second one was that the government realized that poverty and unemployment, instead of declining, it has risen. And the method by which unemployment and poverty could be removed was to adopt liberalization, what we call privatization, and what we call all the restrictions that were imposed earlier on privatization, on private sectors, were removed, such as licensing, etc. Licensing, this restriction on investment. If it exceeded 1 crore, then there was questioning. So private sector remained away from investing. And there were all these restrictions were barriers, or restrictions were removed from the private sector. So liberal, and the government became a bit liberal, except on 6 industries which produce goods which are hazardous to health, like chemical industries, tobacco, defense material making industries. Except all these industries, other industries were freed. They were exempted from any restriction. This policy of the government, when the government became liberal and the government decided to allow private sectors to come up and to produce in the country, that is globalization. So this has enabled globalization. Many MNCs came to India and they began to invest, and many Indian companies emerged in MNCs. Tomorrow, we will proceed further this chapter, liberalization and privatization, and we will carry on it for further. Go through and prepare your notes. Thank you, students.